Across the church year, there are certain Sundays that have official names. Easter Sunday is probably the most famous of them. Recently, we celebrated the Feast of Pentecost and Trinity Sunday. Elsewhere in the year is All Souls and All Saints Transfiguration Sunday, the Sunday after the Ascension. And then there are Sundays that don't have official names but feel like they ought to. And this Sunday would be one of those. There is such a deep theme running through all of the readings. This maybe we could call Seed Planting Sunday, or someone at the 8 suggested Shrubbery Sunday. That works for me as well. In Ezekiel, in Psalm 92, even in Paul, in his theologically dense way, there are these images of planting and waiting and hoping and worrying and growing. Probably the most famous of them all is found in the Gospel of Mark. The kingdom of God is like a mustard seed. By the time we get to the Gospel of Luke, which most scholars think is the third Gospel written and probably informed by Matthew or Mark, or both Matthew and Mark, the metaphor has developed, and now Jesus says, if you have faith like a mustard seed, you could tell a tree to unplant itself and go plant itself in the ocean. But here in the brevity of Mark, we haven't gotten as far as faith. Here in Mark, Jesus says, what is the kingdom like? What parable shall we use for it? It's like a mustard seed. So I'd like to do a little wondering with you this morning about mustard seeds, about this, and about seeds more broadly, and about Jesus' parable for the kingdom. I'd like to wonder about what this parable might mean, and then about what it definitely doesn't mean, and then again about what it might mean. So maybe, no, maybe is our pattern for this morning. So we're first wondering for what the parable of the mustard seed might mean. In this wondering, Jesus is saying to us, you're starting with something small. It looks like it isn't much, but be of good cheer. With God's help, small things grow into big things, and there is much to celebrate. So have confidence and keep going, even if what you've planted right now looks tiny. And that is an excellent reading of this story, and maybe it's a particularly fitting one on this day as we are honoring graduates. To graduate from school, whether it's high school or university or still something else, is to be kind of standing at this precipice, isn't it? It's a diving board moment. And you're exiting school, but you're not quite in a new thing. You're trying out the language of my old school, even though you were maybe there last week or the week before. And you're wondering, am I ready to be out in the world? Am I qualified to be out in the world? Am I qualified to be an adult? Or am I not really ready for this? Everybody else is ready, but I'm not. And maybe one of the things that this parable of big things and holy things growing out of small ones might say to someone on such a moment is, everybody felt that way. Everyone who had any kind of self-criticality at least felt that way when they were graduating. If you didn't, you may have had a little too much bravado. And here's the secret, most of us still feel that way sometimes. I am several decades into adulthood. There's a number of people in this room who are several decades into adulthood. And I don't know about you, but there are moments when I still have these doubts that I'm qualified to be an adult. I sometimes have these moments when I am afraid I'm going to be found out as an imposter. I've been posing as a grown-up successfully for 30 years now, but someone is going to say, in fact, you really belong in elementary school. And this is a doubt that many of us carry, but on the whole, with the help of community, with the help of God, with the help of the many people who love us, we keep on growing. That's a good moral or lesson as you are graduating. And it's a good moral as well, it seems to me, for a church. This moral is often told in church situations, isn't it? You've got this ministry that's starting with something tiny, but with God's help, you can grow it into something big and holy. That feels like a moral for Grace Memorial, doesn't it? If there were an extra canonical reading that proclaimed who we are as a parish, so a reading that was not from Scripture, that reading would assuredly be The Little Engine That Could. We're not a cathedral, we're certainly not a mega church, but this is a campus that is busy throughout the week with all of these ministries that are serving the parish, serving the neighborhood, parish being an old school word for neighborhood. We trusted this past year that we could renovate the chapel and turn it into something new. And the community had the bravery to plant that seed, even though we know that changing a worship space is a predictable time of anxiety, of anger, of even sabotage. We went ahead and we did that, and it's grown into something wonderful. That space, which used to be used for half an hour once a week, is now in use throughout the week. It'll be an art camp classroom next week. There was a 12-step group in there yesterday. Liz tells the story of meeting in that space with her deacon colleagues, and her colleagues were remarking on how beautiful the space is and how amazing it was that we were able to get that project done. The deacons know how difficult it is to change a liturgical space. Similarly, some 27 years ago, a bunch of people at Grace planted the seed that turned into art camp. A small thing, this plucky, volunteer-driven thing, and it's now become one of the most beloved camps and popular camps in Portland. It sells out on the first day. We are the Taylor Swift of summer camps. And right now, we are planting the seed that is going to turn into affordable housing on this campus. Boy, there's a daunting idea, right? Is that seed ever going to grow? We've been talking about this forever. Has it kind of gotten lost in a crack? But the day is going to come when, because of all of you and because of our neighbors and because of God's help, we're going to cut the ribbon on this new building and an improved parish hall, a new space for kilns and for us to meet. It is going to be wonderful. Small things can turn into big and wonderful things. That's a great reading of this parable, and it's the reason it's probably the most popular reading of this parable. So what Jesus might mean by this. Here's the second one. Here's what he definitely doesn't mean by this parable. So across the years, I've heard several badly mistaken sermons on the subject of the mustard seed, and at least one of them was given by me. And what the preacher announced in the sermon is there's this sort of historical key to unlocking the parable of the mustard seed. If you know this thing about Jesus' culture, about the ancient Near East, about ancient Israel, you'll understand the parable in a new way. And the thing that you need to understand, and that's going to just open your mind, is the understanding that back in Jesus' time, the mustard seed was ritually unclean. Oh, wow, right? Suddenly you're like going back and hearing the parable a second time. Does anyone know where this argument might go wrong? So where this argument goes wrong is there is no historical evidence whatsoever for that claim. That is a made-up thing, that the mustard seed was ritually unclean. What happened is I sat in a pew, I heard a preacher say that, and later on, when it was my turn to preach on the mustard seed, I uncritically repeated the thing that I had heard the preacher say, and I suspect that that preacher in turn was uncritically repeating. We have this kind of perverse apostolic succession where all these people are just repeating this thing that they heard. And that would be probably just lazy and harmless, except that this reading sets you up to completely misunderstand Jesus and to completely misunderstand his fundamentally Jewish identity. In this reading, Jesus is kind of rejecting, right? The kingdom of God is like this thing that contaminates stuff and goes everywhere, and in particular rejects the purity laws of Judaism, is what this reading tells us. And that is it's still another effort, intentional or not, to separate Jesus from his Jewishness. Jesus spends his entire life a Jew. He dies a Jew. He is observant as a Jew throughout his life. He says, I came not to abolish the law and the prophets, but to fulfill them. Yes, he is arguing with other Jewish folks and arguing with the tradition, but he argues the way that Episcopalians argue with each other. We're not arguing about whether it's right or wrong to be an Episcopalian. We agree it's excellent to be an Episcopalian, and it is excellent to be an Episcopalian, but we're arguing about how it's best to be an Episcopalian. Those are the arguments that Jesus has with other folks. We've talked, I think, before about making your way through an annotated Bible. If you don't have one of those, get yourself an annotated Bible. This is a Bible with lots of footnotes in it. And one of the things you find if you read the Gospels and look at annotations is that Jesus is constantly referring to what we call the Old Testament. His parables, his sayings, his actions are predicated on and reinventions of Leviticus and Exodus and Genesis. He's constantly echoing. The Old Testament is the rock on which he stands. The Jewish tradition is the rock on which he stands. So it's important to not imagine that he is telling stories or acting in a way that rejects Judaism. That sets us up for some really problematic thinking, for slipping into that common heresy of I believe in the good God of the Old Testament, of the New Testament, not the bad God of the Old. Right? This is incoherent and lazy, actually. Consider the good God we encounter in Psalm 23. Consider the good God who declares creation good. Consider the good God who feeds the people in the wilderness and liberates them from captivity. Consider the good God who rescues Hagar in her desperation. So many examples of goodness in what we call the Old Testament. So a thing this does not mean. Last of all, what this might mean. I'm going to return to where we started. Might, not might. What might Jesus' parable mean? So the mustard seed definitely is not unclean. There's no evidence for that. But it might be funny. So we have, and the lectionary is highlighting this for us today. The schedule of readings we follow is highlighting this for us today. Jesus has, in the Old Testament tradition, in his tradition, lots of examples of majestic things growing. We hear from Ezekiel today about the cedar of Lebanon. And we hear again in Psalm 92 about the cedar of Lebanon, this amazing, majestic tree. It is so majestic that it's on the flag of Lebanon right now. And it's amazing. It's full of grandeur. When you see it, you are full of awe, kind of like being in a redwood forest here on the West Coast. And if Jesus was looking for an example of something majestic that grows out of something small, well, you can imagine him drawing on the cedar of Lebanon. Or if he was here in America, he might talk about an oak tree or a redwood. in the Message, in that paraphrase of Scripture, there's a clue that Christians are sometimes embarrassed that Jesus reaches for the image of the mustard seed rather than that of the cedar of Lebanon, because in that paraphrase, the translator just changes mustard seed to mighty oak tree. And suddenly it's this entirely different image. And maybe that's fine if the first reading of the parable is correct. But I wonder if Jesus isn't telling us something important when he talks about a mustard seed and then ends his speech with the words, "It's the greatest of all the shrubs." So if you were writing an inspirational speech, like, let's, do the thing and win the game. There's a good motivational speech there. I should write that down. If you were writing that, I want to suggest that an image you probably would not reach for is that of the greatest of all the shrubs. It's kind of a bit of an image that falls on its face. Surely you would talk about an oak tree. And that suggests that as Jesus shares this, there is a glimmer in his eye. There's a little bit of a wink. He is suggesting that the kingdom of God, yes, it grows from small to big, but there's also something a little, I don't know what. There is an element of playfulness about it. There is an element of the unexpected, of the funny about it. The kingdom of God is not this tree you deliberately plant in your backyard. It's this thing that when you look out your back window, you realize is unexpectedly growing in your garden. It is the seed that is blown in or is carried in by a bird, and you look out and one June day you realize, I have a mustard seed. I have a mustard shrub in my backyard. It's something like a weed. If that's right, if Jesus is using a somewhat comical image, this image of stuff going everywhere and growing everywhere. Kevin Walsh was saying the other day, one of the things about Oregon is other parts of America it's hard to get things to grow, and in Oregon it's hard to stop things from growing. If the mustard shrub is this thing that is growing everywhere, what might the lesson, what might the good news be for us, for graduates, or for church? Well, I wonder, it seems to me sometimes in our lives we are wondering if what we are doing has any kind of structure, if it has any kind of purpose. We're doing things that maybe feel futile. We're doing a job, but it doesn't feel like it's really making much difference. But I hope you've had the experience. I hope you've had the experience of someone coming to you and thanking you for something that you said or did, and realizing that you were surprised to be thanked for that thing. And if you're like me, there's one of two reasons that you are surprised. The first is the thing that was a big deal that you did in that person's life that proved liberating or encouraging or helped them get through a hard patch. It just seemed to you to be so small. And when that person thanks you, you say, that just didn't seem like it was that big a deal. And if I'd known that was important to you, I would have done it all the time. But I'm so glad to learn that this thing was important. The other reason that I'm sometimes surprised, and maybe you're surprised when I get thanked for something that I said or did, is that I don't remember doing it. It's simply fallen entirely out of my head, and someone says, I loved how you talked about whatever. I'm like, I have no recollection of saying that. But I've learned across the years that the proper response when someone says thank you so much for saying this is to say you're welcome. There's no need to argue when someone shares that stuff. Right before Jesus tells the parable of the mustard seed, I guess sort of parable 1.0, he tells this story of the sower scattering seeds. And is so often the case in the Gospels. There is this profligate nature to the scattering, this wild, careless way of scattering the seeds. This is not skillful farming that this person is engaging in. They've got these seeds and they're just hucking them everywhere. In another version of this parable, Jesus says some of them fall, and I think we sang this in the hymn, didn't we? Some of them fall on rocky ground, and some of them fall on dodgy, weedy ground, and some of them fall on good ground, and we're not sure. We're not sure. So maybe there is good news here as we go through the world, sowing in a way that the kids would call random, just throwing stuff everywhere. We may be planting something good that we can't guess at. When we're kind to someone, when we are generous with someone, when we just do a good or virtuous work, we might be planting something, even when it looks like we're doing it in a place where nobody is noticing, or we're doing it for someone who doesn't deserve it. There may be a seed that gets planted and grows into something amazing. That too feels like important news for graduates. That too feels like important news for church. Just throw the seeds of your generosity, of your creativity, throw them everywhere, and trust that it may grow. Now, a kind of popular heresy that I've said a few times, and I kind of always get in trouble for saying this, but I'm going to keep saying it because it's true. You can't do anything you put your mind to. This is one of the least helpful things that we tell to graduates. It's like, you can do anything you put your mind to. Actually, you can't. Most of us are never going to play sports for money. Most of us are never going to be president. Most of us are never going to be rock stars. But you can live a deeply meaningful life. You can live a life of service. You can live a life of kindness. You can live a life of compassion. You can live a life that is deeply congruent with the gospel. And that is good. And that is worthwhile. And it might be better than being a rock star, actually. To get to love people and be loved in return, to get to serve people, to get to, in a small way, participate in growing the kingdom. Frederick Buechner famously said, the place where God calls you is the place where the world's deep hunger and your deep gladness intersect. And so maybe there's an invitation in this scattering for all of us to find that place. And who knows, as we scatter seed all over the place in this beautiful and unskillful way, maybe we will plant something. And maybe something will get planted within us. Maybe, in spite of everything, we will grow up and provide shade for the birds and drop seeds of our own. Maybe we will become the greatest of all the shrubs.